Hey guys, Elizabeth Blackstock from PlanetF1.com here, taking over for Sean today on the F1 Word to offer you all a little food for thought after the Bahrain Grand Prix. Has Oscar Piastri overtaken Lando Norris as the championship favorite at McLaren? The heat might have been oppressive over in Isack here, but Piastri was cool as a cucumber as he nabbed pole position and converted it to a win. And not just any win, but a win by 14.5 seconds over the competition. Meanwhile, Lando Norris made an error on his fast lap in Q3 and could only manage a sixth-place start, which was made all the worse with a 5-second penalty thanks to starting the race outside of his grid slot. Now, he did absolutely crush it on his way to a podium position, but considering how close the field is in 2025, those little mistakes can add up. Now, to really understand this current McLaren conundrum, I think it's important to remember that its 2024 performance came as a complete surprise to the team. McLaren has struggled hard since the introduction of the hybrid engines in 2014, but with Andrea Stella taking over as team principal and Zak Brown assuming the role as CEO at McLaren Racing, there's been a transformation. Systematic investment in both team personnel and in the race facilities has created an environment where innovation can thrive, and all of those pieces really came together with Lando Norris's maiden win in Miami. That weekend, McLaren arrived with a slew of upgrades that just worked, and it coincided with the slump in performance from Red Bull Racing. Stella and Brown both have stated that they didn't expect to actually be competitive until 2025. So, that 2024 performance seems like it caught everyone, drivers included, by surprise. That also means that Lando Norris was launched directly into the spotlight. He only got to bask in the glory of that win for a few weeks before suddenly the question became, can you snatch this title from Max Verstappen? That's a huge increase in pressure for a guy who was likely still settling into his role as McLaren's more experienced driver, even if he was in his 6th year of competition. That increase in performance also meant that Norris's younger teammate Oscar Piastri was placed on the same competitive playing field as Norris, and Piastri was only in his 2nd season in F1. McLaren's 2nd win in 2024 was scored by the Kiwi 7 races later in Hungary, though it did admittedly come with some perplexing strategy on McLaren's part. Piastri was in the lead when McLaren opted to give Norris the favorable pit strategy, which put Norris in the lead. As a result, instead of scoring his 2nd win in 2024, Norris was asked to move aside and let his teammate by. It was pretty clear that McLaren really hadn't prepared for that situation. They hadn't prepared to be on the top of the charts, and it made for some messy team calls. Enter papaya rules. McLaren has explained papaya rules as basically being some general guidelines that state both drivers should race one another with respect. But that doesn't necessarily guarantee that the McLaren drivers are always happy with their results. Nevertheless, the teammates worked together so well that McLaren was able to snatch the World Constructors' Championship away from Red Bull, and unless the Milton Keynes team somehow worked some engineering magic over the offseason, then McLaren were the easy favorites for 2025. Of course, that also promised to heap even more pressure on the driver's shoulders. Would McLaren prioritize Lando Norris? Zak Brown and Andrea Stella have been absolutely adamant that they won't. With 2 good drivers on the team, McLaren has insisted that it fully intends to let them battle it out on track. And after Bahrain, it looks like we're in for a really compelling title fight this year. Norris might still lead the Drivers' Championship with 77 points, but Oscar Piastri is just 3 points behind. For as much as McLaren has insisted that both of its drivers are equally matched and that it sees them as being equally capable of securing a world championship, there is one big area where the 2 drivers differ: their psychology. Now, I have no intention to diagnose either of these drivers, and I also don't want to rag on a guy who has been refreshingly open about the impact motorsport has had on his mental health. But in covering Formula One so closely, I've had plenty of opportunities to listen to both Piastri and Norris talk about McLaren's ascent to the top of the charts, and there have been some really big differences in the way that they've coped with that. Let's start with Norris. Naturally, Norris and McLaren were pinpointed as the clear championship favorites coming into 2025, and so far, those predictions have panned out. Norris leads the Drivers' Championship, McLaren leads the Constructors' Championship, but Norris has often strongly pushed back against the suggestion that he might be the best driver with the best car. Before and after the season opener in McLaren, Norris seemed to have plenty of confidence about the team, and that positivity played out in a strong race win from a surprisingly impressive start. It really looked like Norris had gone and addressed the weaknesses he'd seen in 2024. But in China, Norris told media he felt he was actually struggling, that his MCL 39 was feisty and leading him to make errors. Going into Japan, Norris did admit that he was confident McLaren was strong at every track, but he attributed that difference in pace to the fact that we are literally the only team that has two good drivers at the moment. He also stressed that McLaren wasn't as far ahead of the rest of the field as they seemed. Any time cars have hit the track, he's tended to point out the successes of others as a way to downplay his own performance. Interestingly, Norris has also taken the media to task pretty regularly this season, saying that any speculation about which team is dominant is short-sighted and that the media shouldn't just report what the drivers say. He's really felt it necessary to kind of set the record straight. But in setting the record straight, he's kind of talking down on himself. Now compare that to Oscar Piastri, a guy who seemingly couldn't care less what other folks are saying. After taking pole in Bahrain, he was really candid in saying that he's not shying away from the fact that we have the best car at the moment. I think to say otherwise is not correct. Immediately after, he pointed out that the margins have been tight this season, so there's plenty of drivers from other teams ready to pounce the moment McLaren makes a mistake. But he also said it would be silly to claim McLaren was somehow on the back foot here. Neither of these drivers have been perfect. In Australia, after Piastri drove off the track and got stuck in the grass, he said he was disappointed in his own error, but otherwise felt he was really strong behind the wheel. That's really drastically different than Norris saying after Bahrain qualifying that he felt like he'd never driven a Formula One car before after making a mistake on his flying lap. Norris also spoke at length about how it's his performance costing the team and how there's no excuse for how he's been driving. The frustration was clear in his voice, even as he claimed he didn't care about the impact that quali could have on his championship hopes. It's clear he really does care, deeply, and denying that doesn't really seem to help him. Mindset can make or break an athlete in any sport, and because Formula One features a single person in the cockpit, there's an outsized amount of pressure on that one driver. That makes it extra important that these guys find a way to cope with that stress. But how? Well, I've done plenty of digging into the most important tenets of sports psychology, and psychologists and researchers and academics all agree that confident self-talk is a massive element of success. The Ohio Center for Sports Psychology states that attitude is a choice, and that your attitude is dependent on how you talk to yourself. That doesn't mean totally ignoring it when you make a mistake or blaming everyone else. But it does mean acknowledging your advantages and your issues in the same way you'd acknowledge them in your best friend, with kindness, understanding, and a willingness to improve in the future. If your best friend had the fastest car in Formula One, how would you handle that? Would you be quick to tell them that their car isn't all that good, even if you thought it really was? Or would you agree with them, even while knowing that raw speed is still only one part of a complex package? If your best friend was really down on themselves about making a mistake, would you pile on to that, or would you help pinpoint where they succeeded and gently suggest ways to improve in the future? When you look through the list of the best F1 drivers in history, at these guys who were able to string together really strong performances on their way to a world championship, they all had an unshakable confidence in themselves that they weren't afraid to express. That doesn't mean that they weren't humble. It just means that when someone like Juan Manuel Fangio or Jim Clark or Michael Schumacher prepared for a race, they knew when they'd be good, and they knew that they could overcome plenty of problems to make it to the lead. When someone pointed all that out, well, they weren't going to argue with it. As it stands right now, both McLaren drivers are incredibly quick, and both of them are completely capable of battling for a title in 2025. Both of them have also shown that they could use a little more refinement in managing their emotions in the heat of the moment. I've mentioned them a few times in this video, but I'm thinking of Norris's tough Bahrain quali and start here, and of Piastri's run off the road in Australia right after the team told him not to overtake his teammate. Both drivers have made these heat-of-the-moment mistakes, and that can really change the shape of a championship fight. But when it comes to managing expectations, acknowledging strengths and weaknesses, and staying cooler longer on the track, well, Oscar Piastri looks like he's a step ahead of his teammate right now. Now, none of this means that Norris can't improve his mindset and maintain a strong championship lead throughout the season. It just means he's missing that one last piece of the puzzle that could make him unstoppable. And as the season goes on, that missing piece can be exactly what gives Piastri an edge. After all, Formula One is a sport of fine margins, and every ounce of performance matters, whether it's on the track or in your head. But what do you guys think? Will Oscar Piastri's level head give him an edge over Lando Norris? Or has Norris proven himself worthy of McLaren's unyielding support even on his off days? Head down to the comments and let us know your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to the F1 Word and like the video on your way down. That's all from me today. As always, I'm Elizabeth Blackstock, and I'll have more deep dives into the 2025 F1 season over on planetf1.com. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see y'all next time.